I have this one quirk that would drive my college students crazy. Sometimes they would go on very dramatically about something totally useless, about something they saw at the lunchroom or something, and I would start tuning it out, and I'd just start praying or thinking about something else. But when I would, think about something else, I tended to stare without knowing it, and I didn't stare off into space. I would stare intently at somebody without even knowing it, and it just started creeping them out, getting them very uncomfortable, and they would start yelling at me for it. So, I don't know, does that afflict anybody else? No one else stares randomly. All right, one person, cool. Sometimes we get so into our own thoughts, right, we don't even know where our gaze is set. Right? I mentioned that because here we are in Luke chapter 9, and our gospel today is the chapter 9, verse 51 and then following. And this verse, 51, it's a hinge verse in the entire gospel. It separates the gospel into two sections. So it's great as we get back into ordinary time, right? We're picking up where we left off in the Gospel of Luke back before Ash Wednesday, right? And so we'll be reading the Gospel of Luke all the way up until November to the Feast of Christ the King at the end of November. And so this verse 51, when Jesus' days of being taken up were fulfilled, he resolutely determined to journey to Jerusalem. In the Greek, it literally says he set his face, or he set his gaze to Jerusalem. So for the first 9 chapters of Luke, we've been hearing all about the ministry of Jesus up in Galilee, in his hometown, and what he's been doing and teaching there, right? And now with this verse, the next 9 chapters of the gospel will be the story of Jesus with his disciples journeying to Jerusalem, right? To Jerusalem, this place of the cross, right? The place where self-sacrificial love will be demanded of Christ. And on this journey, he's going to be teaching his disciples what it means to follow after him, right? What it means to follow after him. Right? And so this is why we, at the very, very, very beginning, we get an example from these 3 random strangers who are invited to follow Jesus, right? And they all have an excuse, right? They're setting their gaze elsewhere. They're not resolutely determined to go to Jerusalem. Make sense? So a little backstory, this invitation to discipleship, we hear the phrase, come follow me, all the time, right? Lech hakari in the Hebrew. It was a phrase that every little Jewish kid dreamed of hearing, right? The guys, they would go off to school as little kids, right? And they would study the Torah, they would study the prophets, they would study the history books. They would memorize as much scripture as possible. Every couple years, if they weren't good enough, they'd be kicked out of school. And then when they were about 16 or 17, they brought the best and the brightest students before all the rabbis of the village. And if a rabbi saw in one of the pupils the potential to become like himself, he would say to that pupil, come follow me, right? Come follow me. And that pupil would be so excited now to become a disciple of this rabbi, to learn from him and to become like him, right? This is why, when we meet the original disciples, when we meet these three others in the gospel today, they're not following a rabbi because they probably just weren't good enough. They weren't bright enough, right? They were just fishermen, right? They were it's kind of nice because they were probably like us, right? My guess is most of us here weren't the valedictorian of our high school class. We're probably just normal, hopefully somewhere in that normal spectrum, right? But Jesus saw in them the potential, right? The potential to become like him. And so the challenge with these 3 today is, do they want to set their gaze, set their face upon Jerusalem or not? Right? We get the example with the Samaritans. They rejected Jesus because he was determined to go to Jerusalem, right? They rejected it, right? So think about that for us, right? Jesus says to you, it was not you who chose me, it was I who chose you, right? Come follow me. That Jesus sees in each and every one of us the potential to become like him, right? That you have been created, endowed with the image of God, and thus capable of becoming like God. Right? And so for the next 5 months, as we continue through the Gospel of Luke, we have the invitation to walk with the disciples, to learn like the disciples what it means to become like Jesus. Right? And so the challenge, I think, for us today is that we have to resolutely determine, we have to desire to go to Jerusalem, to that place where self-sacrificial love will be demanded of us. Right? I think that's the ultimate question for us, is do we want to go to that place? Do we want Jesus to lead us to a place where self-sacrificial love will be demanded of us?